Greetings everyone, my name is Etterville, and welcome back to my Let's Play of Skyforge. During the last part, I was preparing for the Ascension pre-update and finishing as much of the Malaine Caves as possible. This will be an intermission part where I go over several of the major changes introduced with Ascension. Thankfully, we have Rita to help guide us along the way with the basics.
They say there's a present for everyone under the festive tree in the park. Hurry up and open yours.
Allion has changed. You will have to learn a lot about it all by yourself, but I can give you the basics. Good luck. The Globe of Allion now displays only the most important of adventures. The rest you can find on your campaign map. If you want to become stronger, you need to help the residents of the capital. Yes, much assistance is needed here. The most important thing is the campaign map. It consists of 3 parts: the capital, provinces, and Allion. The capital is a place where you can learn new abilities and increase your might and prestige. Provinces. We have marked the mortals' pleas for help here. Perform heroic deeds and receive rewards. Allion. Here you can see our progress in the war against invaders, as well as other important information. Followers every day.
These gifts usually consist of credits, or on rarer occasions, argons. And you can raise the minimum reward by increasing your current rank in your altar.
This is where your followers worship you. Improve your cathedral, and more people will be able to give you their faith. It will boost both your might and your prestige. Transfer it to scientists. They can conduct research, which will make you more powerful.
For the early to mid parts of the game, this is where you're going to get the bulk of your might progression. Though you'll need to spend a lot of knowledge of enemies as well as credits to progress later. Although once you reach another tier, you'll get a major bonus to your might, so keep that in mind.
Defend Allion against invaders and compete against other immortals. You can earn Victor's medals, which can be spent on special abilities and items.
Although considering the costs of all these upgrades, it'll take quite a while before you can afford any of these upgrades. These are designed more for the long-term players or people in the late stage, as people who have just started, well, they'll be falling behind in terms of purchasing these, especially with the current systems in place.
Protecting Allion from invasions has always been and still is the main objective of the gods. Avatars are forever appearing on Allion, and only warriors hardened by battle have the ability to defeat them. Many things have changed, and I cannot tell you everything, but you can find any information you need in the Alinet. And the Gravedigger. I have a feeling he's going to play a big part in your destiny.
Here's a post on the Alinet explaining what you should do for your first login post-Ascension update. And following that, once I complete the quest, I get a lot of compensation notices for all the currencies and resources that were removed during Ascension. Most of my stuff was converted into credits, knowledge of enemies, victors' medals, stimulants, and new equipment. Overall, the systems have been streamlined both in terms of equipment and progression, and there's less to keep track of now, although I have mixed feelings of it as I mentioned in the last part. Credits are of course credits. Knowledge of enemies, think of them as a combination of all of the basic spark types. Victor's medals are war rewards for all the wars. Stimulants are basically updates version of the Spark replicators, although they're much more flexible and can be used for speeding up a depth progression, certain quest lines, aka skipping them, and a few other things. So they're a lot more flexible. As for the equipment, well, for now, most equipment can be used between all classes now, with the exception of your weapon. And now, instead of just determining how much damage or might contribution they deal, it's more like what effects they do instead, because they all have secondary effects that can give bonuses to you. So none really contribute to your might specifically, it's more like how much they benefit your secondary stats and other things. Speaking of which, most of your primary stats, of which there were 6 or 7 attributes before Ascension, have been rolled into Might, which did exist before, but now it's a lot more important. Might affects your max health and damage. Specifically, for every 10 points of Might you get plus 50 to max health, plus 1 to base damage, plus 1.25 to critical damage, plus 2 to your companion's damage, and this is before applying all the modifiers that you can get from strongholds or bastions. And oh yeah, we now have companions. Companions were an optional upgrade back in the original version of Skyforge, but you need to get in the upper Ascension Atlas to a certain point where you can unlock it, but even then you would have to waste a symbol slot. And speaking of which, symbols in their last state, at least class symbols, are now gone. Or they have been kind of reworked into bastions, where now you get symbols for completing quest lines and upgrading your bastions. And bastions, well, there's one bastion per each of the 9 provinces on the world, and you unlock it by completing every single quest in the campaign of that region, or province. And by doing so, you can now upgrade your bastion, and each bastion gives one symbol, or a choice of one symbol slot, as well as passive abilities. So you can, once you unlock all 8 or 9 of the bastions, then you have about 8 or 9 ability slots, 8 specifically, that you can use and upgrade. My apologies, the 9th and final province is a little bit special and it doesn't really have a campaign map of sorts. So you'll have 8 choices to choose your abilities, and they're a little bit more horizontal progression. Like for example now, the Divine Intervention ability, or symbol, which I had before, is now a basic level ability in one of the bastions you unlock. Considering how often it was used in many other classes, I think that was a good trade-off. Also, because of how my progression worked out, you now unlock classes once you complete enough quests on the campaign map. So because of that, I now have the Berserker, Slayer, and a few other classes unlocked too, as well as the Archer, which I didn't have before. I only really had the 3 base classes of Cryomancer, Lightbinder, and Paladin unlocked, as well as the Kinetic, but I also got a few others unlocked, like the like the Slayer, the Archer, as well as the Berserker. Unlocking class abilities is much easier in this, although there's much less flexibility, and you don't have many towns. I mean, before we had about 30 towns in the Paladin, or 25, but now we only have up to 4. It's very streamlined, and you unlock abilities much faster, as you do it by basically doing kill class, like kill 10 or 20 of this type of enemy, or 10 or 20 of this special type of enemy anywhere, instead of having to spend a lot of sparks and gimping your progression if you have to mix up between classes. Sure, I suggest you complete your classes completely before moving on to a new one, like complete one of the basic classes and then move on to a new one, but moving on to a new one doesn't really gimp your stats like it did before because of how might progression worked. Instead, it only really upgrades your current class and it doesn't really contribute to your might. It does contribute to your prestige, but your prestige doesn't impact the levels you can go to. Well, it does, but instead of just impacting your might and making it so much more difficult to go through the new levels because you're under-geared for equipment, it's a lot more forgiving now, and you can unlock your abilities faster, but there's much less flexibility. And here I'm selecting the basic level 1 tiers for each of the bastions. Normally you're supposed to complete all of the campaign quests in each of the provinces, but because I completed several of the missions in the previous update before Ascension, they gave me compensation and basically said I completed 4 of the provinces. Although for the 4th province I only really completed 1 or 2 of the missions. But they gave it to me anyway, so that's pretty nice. And considering this is a new update, well, I decided to change up my gear and use the Paladin gear. Or a custom robotic gear. Might as well change my gear up for a new world. As for my thoughts on this update, well, I do like how the game made it so that it's a little bit harder to, or much harder to actually gimp yourself in the long run, or screw yourself up. As in the previous one, or previous versions of the game, with the Ascension update, Ascension Atlas, as well as the Upper Ascension Atlas, it was really easy to screw up if you weren't careful, as there was a lot of beginner traps with how you shouldn't have invested in might because it proportionally wasn't as good as strength or constitution. And so if you invested a lot in might, you would end up getting locked into much harder content, so you'd get less powerful gear, and because of that you would have a harder time, and it would be a vicious cycle where it would take a lot longer in order to recover yourself. And of course there's those people who invested in multiple classes, and they would be even more out of luck because then each class wouldn't be as geared for the quests as they should be. However, because of these changes now, there's a lot less flexibility in what you can unlock. As you can see, there's now a linear progression in the maps. Before it was more based off of prestige gating, so you could skip around a bit more. But now because of how the quests are grouped, well, you're forced to complete at least 4 or 5 quests before you can move on to the next area. It does give a sense of cohesion now that we're going to areas in the same relative region. But it kind of messes up with other things because there's now less flexibility to go on forward. And also because of this, a lot of the missions have been moved around and changed in difficulty. So stuff like the Red Coast, which was a high-level open-world region, is now in the first province in a low-level region. In fact, it's supposed to be the first open-world region you're supposed to go to now, as Diangkat Island is now just the first level squad adventure instead of an open world region. Here I'm gathering presents for the Christmas event, which I mostly missed, so I won't gather most of the rewards, sadly. It's been a few months. This part was recorded a few months after the Ascension update hit because of real life work.
Finally! I've been waiting for the new star of the Immortal Assembly to pay us a visit. Welcome to High Society. Immortality gives you many privileges. One of them is the membership in our little club. The city never sleeps, and you'll be welcome at any party. Let me introduce myself. I'm Alcibiades. They call me the god of social life. Well, always staying on top of things, isn't it a divine power? I know everyone worth knowing. If you need advice about whom to befriend and whom to avoid, just ask me.
Well, we have someone who can help us around with this place and learn about the various characters here.
These aren't simple snowballs. The holiday spirit has filled them with magical power. If you don't jump and get the snow off you, you will be turned into a snowman. Don't worry, it's not permanent. You can easily shake it off.
Unfortunately, one of the main losses during the Ascension update was the list of all those side quests that you can go on. You know, like on the Argus system, some of the side jobs, like the news reporter who is investigating all of the mortals who are dying under the charge of a certain immortal. I like them because they added flavor to the world, but sadly they were removed. You do have the main story quest line, thankfully, the one with the Gravedigger, which I do appreciate, but I still miss the side quests.
maybe they haven't added them yet. Or forgot.
Before heading off on my first adventure post-Ascension, I'll be investing a ton of credits and knowledge of enemies into the Tower of Knowledge, which will boost up my might significantly. Although this was kind of a mistake, considering that the early missions as well as open world regions are tiered for early game players, which basically means that they're really easy. And especially for open world regions, they never really scale up, they're always at a static difficulty, so I'll destroy all the monsters pretty easily, and thus I won't be able to show off what the enemies, mini-bosses, and bosses can do properly. As for the squad adventures, well, they will scale up to my level eventually, but I need to complete them multiple times over and over until they can get to a high enough difficulty setting where I can actually face a threat. As in an earlier update, even before Ascension, they changed how the mission difficulty settings are upgraded. Before, they was based specifically on your prestige, and if you got to a higher prestige, it upgraded your difficulty automatically. However, in the new version they added, what they did was they gated it based off of progressively getting harder versions. So as you completed easier versions, you got harder versions, and so on. And so that if you are at a higher prestige but you didn't upgrade your equipment or your stat allocation and the Ascension Atlas was not good enough, you wouldn't be out of luck and you would actually be able to progress easily. Unfortunately, what this means is because I'm so high geared, mainly because of all the compensation, how I completed missions in a different order than what the game expected, or different order that was expected back before Ascension was released, but because the order was changed post-Ascension, well, now the missions I didn't complete, well, I'm overgeared for them. So I'll be trying out a bunch of things for that. For the next 1 or 2 parts, for the squad adventures, I'll try doing it at a higher difficulty closer to my level, but then after that I decided that, well, I'll play at the highest difficulty possible in the first set, mainly because the story isn't shown in subsequent playthroughs, sadly. You lose quite a bit of background information from the story characters as well as the Argus system, Snark. So what I decided in the parts beyond those I'll be completing the mission first, and then later I'll try, when I go back and complete all of the campaigns much later, I'll show off all of the squad adventures on the highest difficulties possible. So then we can see what enemies and difficulties are set there. Anyways, I'm replaying Diangkat Island mainly because it was switched from being an open world region, one of the smallest ones, into a squad adventure. And for the most part, most of the quest lines have been maintained. I'm talking over this person as we know in his entire conversation. Most of the quest lines that were originally in the open world region are still here. It's just a lot more linear than before. But still, it's fine. It was a relatively easy mission in the first place. I kind of disagreed with why the first region should be an open world region back in the original, back in part 1 or 2, I think at least. But making it an adventure is a lot better because you can give better direction to the players. As this will be now the first squad adventure players will go through after the tutorial, might as well make it a little bit easy to follow.
These are probably the tourists that went missing last week. We'll have to tell their families.
And the first open world region will be the Red Coast, which used to be a high level region, but it was moved into a low level, so I'll pretty much destroy everything there, but I'll cover that in 2 parts ahead, after I finish off the Myland caves. And I do make another mistake in the future, which is investing too much in the Tower of Knowledge. Sure, it makes it so that I can go to the open world regions and a whole bunch of missions much faster, but it really destroys the challenge and kind of it messes up with the progression. Oh well, the joys of not actually playing as much as I should have. After all, if I played more Skyforge before Ascension update hit, I'd probably be in better shape with showing off these missions. Oh well, it isn't too bad. After all, most of the time when you play the missions to higher difficulty, specifically the squad adventures, the only real difference you see is, well, the enemies get scaled up in terms of stats and damage, but they don't really get increase the difficulty from new attacks, for the most part, barring mini-bosses or bosses. But for that, I can show it on the highest difficulty and show it then. And after all, I'll be playing most of these missions solo, as I have a hard time finding any groups because most of the players are a high enough prestige anyways or playing privately. So then, on the highest difficulty, I'll show what the new boss and enemy techniques are, as there are differences there, I can assure you that. Especially with Diangkat and how much more different Shaz is, aka the final boss of this region. Another neat addition of this game was that the combat's much more dynamic and you can dodge a lot more of the enemy attacks. You won't really see it more with melee classes, but with stuff like the Cryomancer, Archer, and other ranged DPS classes, or supports, you'll definitely see a difference where you can dodge a lot more of the enemy attacks. And you can also randomly break off enemy pieces from the enemies, and you can use them to gain new abilities and temporarily attack foes. Although, depending on which character you're playing as, some of these abilities aren't as good. Like, playing as a ranged DPS and then switching over to a melee weapon isn't the best idea because you're much lower armor. And there we go. Shaz has now been defeated and all the travelers have been avenged. Also, another neat feature is the weather cycles, as in certain adventures or open world regions, the weather may dynamically change, which is quite a beautiful effect. And thus, Diangkat has been completed once again. Now, normally I would then proceed on to complete the Red Coast. Speaking of which, most of the early game missions are still present in the early game, like Factory 901, Diangkat Island, Oki Island, but a few other ones like Nairi Island was pushed forward. Normally after this point I would move on to Factory 901 and the Oki Island and the mission after it, Alikor Island, and then move on to the Red Coast, but instead I'll be moving back to the Myland Caves and get that finished, and then after that I'll move back to the Red Coast. Just showing off that I unlocked the final difficulty. Well, not really the final difficulty, but the highest level difficulty in this set. As I completed complete development of the Paladin in the last part, I don't have to re-unlock the PvE or PvP classes, so everything is unlocked and my Paladin class is at max power. Just quickly showing off the various Paladin abilities, pause if you need be. And time to move back into the Myland Caves, which is in the Artemian Mountains province, the 4th province in the game. Well then, in this part, I went over most of the basic level changes added to the Skyforge post-Ascension update, although there'll be a lot more intricacies that I'll have to go through in the next few parts. In the next part, I'll be finishing up the Myland Caves open world region. Thanks for watching and have a nice day. Toodles!